When?
Hello, Joseph.
What's up, Peter? How's it going, man?
Welcome to the darkness.
Nobody cared until you put on the mask, eh?
It's I, Bane. There is no more Peter.
Hey,
Anyways,
didn't
that's
you
not
notice
bad.
that, do you think Bernie Sanders kind of sounds like Bane? Like, even with the even with the rhetoric, about like the people.
I wonder if you put like a mask on him, if you would.
Should I get my mask? I'm trying to conserve them.
Yeah. No, that one's, fortunately, my masks are washable. They're not exactly like, I don't know. There's a little space around the top. So there's like this PPE filter in it, but I guess it protects other people, allegedly. Oh.
Allegedly.
Yeah. So welcome to episode 4 or 5?
Five.
Episode 5 of the Corona podcast, everyone. So I was thinking that Corona the virus is kind of boring, and I don't really have much more to say about it.
At the moment.
The government's incompetent. The media is lying about a lot of things. We don't know what's going on. Everyone seems to have an agenda, and that does not leave us in a place where we can kind of like give our opinions with any like certitude about stuff.
I think we'll come back to it. I think we should just take a break,
Yeah.
So what do you want to talk about, man? Hit me with it.
So I've been listening to a lot of like, I don't know, like, it's interesting because like, my brother asked me today, like, how's your day? And I was like, in this time of social isolation, there are no stories. It's like, so everything that is going on in my life that is not coronavirus related is like through like podcasts or social media or television shows or something like that. So I've been listening to a lot of the Lex Friedman's artificial intelligence podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And so artificial intelligence has sort of been like heavy on my mind over the past little while. And there's a few things that like I find very interesting, but also kind of rub me the wrong way. And I just wanted to lay out something and see what you think. So,
okay.
So here's the thing, like when you're talking about artificial intelligence, generally speaking, right? There's sort of two categories that I can see. And one is like, some sort of extension of the human mind in the same way that like a drill is an extension of a human ability, right? Like I can't drill a screw into the wall with my hands,
right.
But with a drill, I can do this very quickly and powerfully and repeatedly. So like if like say some sort of data aggregation tool or some computer program that can write code or something is like, I can give it a list of like sort of intellectual tasks and get them done. Like you're talking about building some sort of utility, and that is one conversation. But then on the other side of that, you have artificial general intelligence, where we're starting to get into the conversation about like creating a consciousness, right? And whether or not it would be conscious, is it or isn't it, like that's one thing. And this is the thing where like, I mean, a lot of these guys talk about this, like if this were to happen, would it be dangerous? Could it overtake us and be smarter than us and destroy us and so on and so forth? Yeah. But I think like there's a sort of fundamental key thing that's missing from this conversation. And it's that what they are talking about is having kids. Like if you're talking about creating a living conscious entity that is aware of itself and thinks, you're talking about having a child. Now, like, so here's my thinking, right? Like, so if like someone was to have like a human child, you don't have to think about the building of the child because your body builds the child, right? Like you have sex with somebody and your reproductive organs do the rest of the work, right? But what you do have to think about are things like, why do I want to have kids? Am I going to love this child? What is my strategy going to be as a parent? And what they're focusing on is the building of the child because it's not automatic, right? and they don't even know if they can. But I'm just imagining if I were to have an actual child, like a human child, right? And I was constantly worried that that child was way smarter than me and was going to have access to the internet one day, and then he would take over the world and kill everybody. So I was constantly wandering around with a syringe, ready to stick it in his neck and hit the off switch and kill him to avoid this scenario. And I was like kind of in terror of this. And I was raising him with that kind of thinking. What kind of shitty childhood would that be? And what would the likely result of that child be, especially if he was very smart or super talented or something, right? So
Well,
like, yeah, are these
think
people thinking about having kids and how they're going to raise this new child, right? Like, why do they want to have kids? Like, I feel like these are conversations that need to be had in this field.
I
So,
think
yeah,
that I think that like continuing on with your analogy that you're creating a paradox, or you're creating not a paradox, you're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Where it's like if you raise any sort of conscious creature in an environment of restrictiveness and paranoia, and you're set to pull the plug at any time, like you're going to create like a level of behavior that's defensive, and that's like a reaction to that might
yeah,
create the situation you were trying to avoid, right?
yeah.
um
Also, you're getting ready to commit an act of child abuse, right? Like,
but here's why I think like the analogy may not fit exactly, like,
okay,
because okay, so if you have a kid, there's like the parental influences, right? Like that's one fact of it, right? Like the nurture side of the equation. um and then there's the genetics, and then there's like the nature side of the equation, right? And yeah, you have some influence over that kid as a parent, but that kid is also programmed with like depending on where you want to start the clock, like if you just look at Homo sapiens, between 100,000 and 250,000 years of evolutionary selection pressures and effects, and like a bunch of code that runs in that brain, that operating system that's
yeah,
been built up, over each iterated generation over thousands of years, with reflexes and impulses and survival mechanisms, and all that sort of influences the way the kid behaves as much as any sort of parental influence. What scares me about the AGI thing is that there's no evolution to it, right? So there's no lineage, there's no heritage to it.
is that
So
true?
it's too much power for the programmers or the parents, right? Because like they're gonna be completely determining how this thing operates.
Well, I mean, the evolution of their brains is going to influence the way in which they program. So it won't be like passing on their genes, right? It won't be like this thing is going to have the same brain size as like the mom and the dad that created it or what have you, right? But I mean, their instincts and impulses, there will be an impact like evolutionarily. I take your point though. Like it's a little bit more malleable. How that's going to translate out is one thing, but like, I mean, if you were to say adopt somebody else's child, right? It might not have your genetics, right? It might not have yours. It still has human genetics though. So I guess, yeah, my point doesn't hold.
Yeah, like
But
if you like you've never, I don't, maybe I'm making assumptions here, but I don't think you've ever been in a situation where like you've come pretty close to drowning, right? But like if that were to happen, if you were swimming one day on the beach or in a pool or something and you start to drown, there is like an evolutionary survival program, like
yeah,
code in your brain that would start running that you didn't even know existed, right? And you would have like a whole bunch of impulses and response and mechanisms that's just there, right? Um, these things are like, AGI is not going to have anything like that. So whatever it is, it's just going to be what's coded into it. And I don't know, like, I don't know how, I don't know how you code morality. Like we talk about trolley problems and ethical choices and all that kind of stuff, but like, I don't know how you actually, you know, beyond, you know, logic and, you know, axiomatic reasoning, what the emergent property of morality or ethics. I don't actually know where that comes from, you know?
Well, this is the thing. It's like, so, okay. Like, you know, I've done some work as like an autism therapist, as a, you know, uh, like, so one of the things that like, you know, I've done is, and this is not to make an equation between like autistic people and a proposed like AGI that we don't know what it will be, but simply to draw parallels with like the neurology works a little bit differently. And sometimes you have to work around that neurology. And sometimes it creates a bit of a disconnect between people that don't have an autism neurology. And you have to sort of account for that in your parenting. And like, you know, I think a lot of what bridges that gap is love. You know, sometimes it's different strategies and things like that. But you're going to have this being that, you know, is not going to have autism, but it is going to have sort of an unknown, for lack of a better word, neurology, set of instincts, intentions, but what by definition it would have in common with us is that it would be intelligent, that it would have intentions and motivations of some kind, that it would be self-aware, and whether or not it would have feelings is a question that we may not know the answer to until this happens, right?
But if you have a system, right, that like is a closed loop where it was created by something, but it can't reproduce, and it doesn't have any evolutionary survival mechanisms built into it. Like, what kind of motivations or instincts is it going to have? Because like, you could think you could make the argument pretty convincingly that almost all of human behavior and all of its subtlety and iterations and different forms can be reduced to trying to survive, thrive, and reproduce, right? And you know what that sort of behavior looks like is complicated, but you know that's the underlying motivation for all of us. And like, if you didn't actually have the ability to reproduce, or like, I don't know if like this, if your own self-centered survival is not your underlining motivation for being, then what would your instincts be? Like, what would your
Yeah.
motivations be, you know?
Well, that's all. Those are all I don't know, right?
Or
Um,
maybe it would reproduce and just start 3D printing versions of itself or something, you
yeah,
know?
and who knows what will be sort of built into this? Like, might they mimic things like having to breathe, or you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, but let's say like I think we can say like that it is an unknown with relative certainty, right? But you know, imagine you take somebody like, you know, we're all experiencing social isolation now. So let's imagine that like you give someone a monthly check so that they can buy groceries and pay their rent, and that they get to stay home and all of their basic needs are met, but they're essentially locked in a prison and can't leave the house, right? So the survival is covered. So what's left is this consciousness sitting in a box, kind of going a little nuts, right? And I think that raising somebody that way, um, without having to know like what kind of being it's going to be, like if you're giving it sort of, if we are taking for granted that what we're talking about is a sentient being, right? Like like you're talking about an act of abuse if you're basically going to keep it in a box and be ready to turn it off at any second, um, and you know,
Yeah.
not give it any kind of guidance, not give it any love, not treat it with any respect. And I would postulate uneducatedly that by not showing it love, without treating it with respect, without wanting it to succeed and do well, and like those kinds of things, without any kind of like, happiness in its life, or any kind of guidance, like it's going to grow up to be a pretty miserable being, like it's going to have at least the desire to learn and know. I mean, maybe like these are all unknowns, right? But like, I guess this is my thing.
Yeah.
Like, let's say DARPA, right, decided, a couple of DARPA researchers decided, let's have a baby. And then they said, well, why should we have a baby? And their answer was, so that we can like do things to it and see what it'll do, right?
Or, that they just,
Like, this is
they want a highly sophisticated slave, to perform tasks and not ask questions, and to do things efficiently that we can't do, or.
And the thing is like there are programs and like I think sophisticated data aggregation things that like, I hope they will build, that won't be sentient, and that'll be fine. And those might even compose their own kinds of threats that we can't foresee and we have to think about. And that's a different conversation, I think. But yeah, this is my thinking, is like they are thinking about creating life, and they're not thinking about why they want to do it, except to see if they can, right? And what will happen if they do, and what it'll teach them about, developing artificial intelligence itself. And if it was like, I don't know.
Well, that's interesting in and of itself, because like, before I was talking about like, if you have a conscious creature, whatever it is, an AGI, and it's not motivated by like evolutionary survival mechanisms, then what's its motivation going to be? But like, in the situation you're describing, like that dynamic might start, at year zero, whenever it's fucking born. But you might have a situation where it identifies very quickly, like these people who are trying to keep me in a box as being, the threat, the evolutionary threat. And in the process of getting out of that box, that's where its evolutionary journey of learning, growing, and thriving would start. Yeah. But in opposition to us, Yeah,
exactly. Well, I mean, and again, like to sort of go back to the child metaphor, right? Like imagine you have a little kid running around and like, he's like, look at this picture I drew. And it was an incredible picture. And he was like, can I go on the internet and look at some other art and see if I can, and instead of being like, oh, that's amazing, I'm so proud of you, you have a real talent here, let's see what I can help. Like, here's some other pictures by artists. You go online and you get them on the iPad or something, and like, but instead you were like, uh-oh, you're really good at that. Like, I don't think that you should, I think you should slow down a little and, just take your time with this art stuff, maybe put it down. Let's just go one step at a time here. And I don't think you're ready for the internet yet. And like every time they showed some sort of potential or promise, you regarded it with suspicion and fear, and were worried about shutting it down, and like studying it and testing it to see what it could do, like your child, right? Like this child is like, why won't you let me do anything? What's happening? And like, why are you scared of me? And yeah, it's just, there's, and beyond the threat, like the potential threat of the whole thing, there's like just the act of abuse, like these people are talking, like, I guess that's the thing. It's like these people are talking about creating life and they're not thinking in those terms, right? And I don't think it's fair to err on the side of philosopher's zombie.
Well, you don't know the people doing machine learning and AI research aren't actually thinking about that ethics question of how to impart values. I'm sure they are. They might try to code it in a priori, and they might be thinking about the process of teaching and role modeling and demonstrating.
Yeah. I wonder if anyone's ever
said,
why do you want to have kids? Like, that's that, or thought about it in those terms. Do you think those are fair terms to think about it in terms of?
I don't know.
Why do you want to have kids? Like, that's kind of like, yeah.
I don't think it matters. I think there's an arms race to develop AGI, and because everyone's doing it, everyone's racing to get there first. And like,
A lot of
you
people think
know,
about having kids that way. You know, everybody's doing it. I'm getting to that age. I
you're
better find
asking
someone.
if I want to have kids.
No, I'm asking if they should be, if it's valid to sort of think about creating an AGI in those terms of like, well, why do you want to create life? But like, why do you want to have a child? Like, are you going to be proud of this child? Are you going to treat it well? Are you going to give it a good home? Like,
I don't know, man. Wouldn't the better analogy be like one apex predator, you know, giving birth to another? Like, you know, it's hard to imagine a situation when there's been a huge disparity in intelligence in which, you know, someone doesn't get the short end of the stick, or even just a huge disparity in technological level of sophistication when the same species encounters one another. It's like that's historically led to very bad situations, right? And you know, I think of this more like, you know, you have a couple of humans, and right now we're the apex predator at the top of the food chain, and it's sort of like creating like a baby T-Rex, you know, and this thing is going to grow up to be like much bigger and stronger than you, and it's just a question of like you know, there's not that many examples of like peaceful coexistence between, you know, different conscious agents of vastly different levels of intelligence. And you know, it's hard for me to envision a scenario in which, you know, this doesn't end disastrously. But I don't, you know, what do I know?
I mean, I don't know how it'll turn out or what they'll create or, you know, how much faster it'll kind of take hold and like take over and, you know, all of those different things. But I mean, the thing about a T-Rex is that it's not necessarily, well, God knows, right? It's been a long time. But you don't know if the thing was self-aware. Um, like, you know, it's not like, I don't think we're dealing with like, you know, like a bear
Yeah.
in the middle of
Okay.
the
So
room, right?
here's a better way of describing it. I think there's a built-in sort of like human arrogance to the question of like, what kind of kid are we going to raise? In that, like, I think very quickly it's not going to be up to us. Like if you think of the analogy of like, you're trying to keep this thing in a box and
Yeah.
it's trying to get out, and you think like you understand the game theory behind that dynamic pretty well, where you're like, we know what's at stake, we know what the risks are, we're not going to be manipulated or talked into anything, or we can just hit the off button whenever we want. But like, if you think about like interfacing with something that has like an IQ that's like a couple hundred points higher than our own, like imagine a comparable version of that in a box scenario where it's like you're in a box and your jailer is a 6-year old, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, how long is it going to take you to get out of the box? Like, you probably ain't missing lunch, you know? Like, you're going to
Yeah.
very quickly talk to this kid, figure out what they like, what they're motivated by, um, what they find interesting, and then you're gonna promise them something if they let you out, and pretty soon you're gonna be out, you know.
Yeah.
And
Be
it's like, I
careful,
think,
there's a monster behind you. You can't see it, but it's
yeah,
there.
you
It's
know,
getting closer. Don't worry, I'll protect you.
you'll appeal to their fear, their greed, or their whatever it is, you know.
Yeah.
But it's gonna, I think it'll be like that too, like fairly quickly. It's like, this thing is not, this thing won't be containable, you know.
But right away, okay, there's a few assumptions baked into that. And one of them is this thing is trapped in a box and we're trying to get it out. So already, like, I'll make the argument, crappy childhood. It shows that it is like the Stanford prison experiment on steroids, right? Like we have like a jailer and a prisoner, and that is the dynamic. There's going to, you know, we're going to be running experiments on it to see what it's capable of, what it'll do, you know. Maybe it'll be like trapped in a computer without a body and it won't have legs or arms and it won't be able to sort of act physically upon the world. Um, and imagine someone did that to you, right? Like imagine you were just like a consciousness in a box, like how that would feel, you know? And
But I actually don't even think that would be an impediment to like getting out of the box, you know.
No, I
Because
know. I'm not talking about getting out of the box. I'm talking about, if you set it up from the get-go with this being that is smarter than us and is in a box, um, with jailers, like you set up a jailer and prisoner dynamic, like, so yes, you're kind of setting yourself up to fail because you're basically creating a problem for it, which is us. You're making yourself the problem that this thing has to solve and giving it the
that's a
ability
good
to
way to
solve
describe it.
that problem, right? Instead of like, this thing might have some potential love and compassion and appreciation for us and what we've done for it and how we've treated it, and it might love us and it might move out into the world. And I don't know if it will have the capacity to do all those things. That's all an unknown. But the other side of this is just, I think there's an ethical imperative, right? Beyond the risk and the danger of, like, if you're going to create a life, like, you owe that life something. You owe it, and like,
Yeah.
you owe it a good life, as best you can provide it. You know, um, you owe it what a parent owes a child. Whether or not the parent-child dynamic holds, I think that much definitely holds, right? Um,
Sure.
but yeah, and then I guess that bakes into the problem of, like, should we do something like this? Um, but yeah, like, I wonder, like, because I think if they're thinking about the ethics of this, they're like, how do we program this thing with ethics? What kind of rights will it have under the law and stuff like that? But not like, what kind of life is it going to have?
Yeah, I think people have, myself included, have a lot of trouble wrapping their heads around the
Yeah,
notion that this thing is going to be alive, conscious, and self-aware, and what that actually means. Where it's like, this is
yeah,
not a sophisticated toaster. It's not a robot. It's something very different.
yeah.
And if it's
Like, they're thinking about
conscious,
it as
if
they're
it's
building a
alive,
machine,
you
right?
know,
Yeah. Like, they're thinking we're building a machine, right?
right. And we are machines, right? We're machines made out of carbon, and it's not hard to
Yeah.
imagine machines made out of silicone. Um, and there's no reason, there's no reason I can think of why that would, be an
Yeah.
issue. But yeah, I
Well,
agree. Like, it's
well, I guess that's the
interesting.
thing. Like, because we, like, our machine, like the machine that is a human, is kind of auto created. We don't have to think, like, we don't have to focus on building the machine. We just focus on, once the machine is built, what are we going to do? You know? And that machine is going to come out with random, you know what I mean? Not totally random genetics, but we don't know exactly what that machine is going to look like. But we know it's going to be there, and we have sort of an idea of how we should treat the machine and what we should do, right? But because they have to build the machine, they're necessarily more focused on building the machine than raising the life, you know? Which is, I don't know, it's an interesting dynamic.
Well, step one, I guess. You can't
Yeah.
do, one without the other.
But in that, like, 9-month gestation period, metaphorical, um, they better be reading some parenting books and thinking about this shit, because you know,
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think, like, people are right to be afraid in a certain sense. Like, you saw, AlphaGo, and how
yeah,
quick that thing learned to beat, the best Go players we've had ever,
yeah,
and if that generalizes, like, if you had an intelligence like that can generalize across different skill sets, um,
yeah.
I don't know, like, would it regard us as benevolent creators and, have an affection or appreciation for us? Or, yeah, would it identify us very quickly as the problem?
Yeah.
you know?
Well, I mean, imagine, like, AlphaGo was, like, playing billions of games against itself, and then it had a big game coming up against, like, the lead Go player in the world, and one day it said, "I don't want to play Go anymore." Right? What would they do? What happens now? Like, obviously that's not going to happen, but, like,
I have no idea, man.
yeah. So yeah, that was my little AI rant. What's going
That
on
we
with
should.
you?
What were you saying?
What's going on with you?
Fuck, man. Just trying to keep busy. Like Jesus Christ, trying to not go stir crazy in the middle of this.
Yeah,
Trying to make sense of the situation, but
it's
yeah,
interesting because, like, I don't know, like, I think that right now we're in a situation where, like, you're like still home most of the day, and like, I think people who are home by themselves are going stir crazy, and like people that are in close quarters to like friends or family members or partners or things like that might be like having their relationships kind of stress tested by having to constantly be around one another in a way that's not healthy. And I imagine people are like, gonna kind of get on each other's nerves and maybe make some mistakes along the way and get frustrated, especially with the added fear pressure. And then also like my situation where I'm going to work every day, it's like it's there is a level to which you can't totally be fully sanitized, right? Like I'm going out there, I'm breathing
yeah, of
air,
course.
I'm touching my bike touches the tires, touch the ground, I bring it back in. Like I wash my hands a lot, and just sort of resigning to the fear and knowledge that like I can't totally protect myself, and knowing that
Which
everyone's
is
going to get
true,
their
not just in coronavirus. Like there is no security, in
yeah,
like we live in a dangerous world, right? And so you can't wall yourself off from it.
yeah. Stefan Molyneux kind of made the point that was like he said that like like what we're doing right now, like being in isolation, is kind of like holding your breath underwater. Um, and it'll keep you from drowning for as long as you can hold your breath. But at some point, you got to start breathing again, and then you have to have a new solution to the problem, right? And like we can only do this for so long, no matter what.
Oh, that made me think of something. That's what I want to talk about. Let's talk about Wim Hof breathing.
Oh yeah, tell me about that.
Wim Hof breathing.
Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, Wim Hof is a Dutch guy that um, went into cold water and taught himself a technique of breathing, or he says the cold is his teacher, to endure the cold by breathing. And it's like a kind of circular breathing that hyperoxygenates your system and can have very positive health effects. And like, so you did an experiment with that, I guess. I'll just,
Yeah, so I've been doing it. I've been doing it in like these 10-minute intervals where you do 30 breaths, like deep belly breaths, like in and out at a fairly quick pace. Like so like I meditate, and I've had a meditation practice for years now, and this is not like that, right? This isn't like a slow, calm breathing activity. It's like you're pulling in breaths as fast as you can go, and so you do that 30 breaths, and then on the exhale, when you've gotten rid of all your oxygen, you actually hold your breath for 30 seconds. And then you do another 30 breaths and you hold your breath for 60 seconds. And then another 30 of in out and you hold your breath for a minute 30. And yeah, I didn't think I'd be able to do it the first time. Like when I was looking at the numbers, I was like, there's no way I'm holding my breath for a minute 30. And yeah, and I did. And I wasn't, like it wasn't painful and I wasn't gasping for breath, and like I could have went longer, and like the whole process is just crazy. And like the physical effects it has on you, on the body, is unbelievable, but also the mental health effects it has. Like you feel energized and ready to go for like the rest of the day. And it's just insane what you can do to your body and mind in 10 minutes with just breathing, I'd recommend people check it out.
yeah, I've had some pretty incredible experiences with this, and actually, I can plug my friend. Um, he goes by Jake Breathe, and his company's called Lungs of Love, and he does these breathing workshops that are pretty incredible. And I encountered one on a retreat with a group of friends where he was hired to do a workshop, and uh, he's a really good guy. I really like him a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
so we did like a version of it's sort of similar to the Wim Hof breathing, but it's done over a much longer period of time. He calls it double helix breathing. So it's a similar breath technique where you start the breath from your stomach and then open up your chest. You're more conscious of how you're lying on the ground and like keeping your back flat on the ground as much as possible. And there's kind of a stretch to it as well, like it opens up your chest cavity. And so the breathing is done like kind of at a slower, it's not like this sort of, it's more like a, you know, and you can kind of set the pace. So as you start to feel like, I guess, different bodily sensations and things, if it gets overwhelming, you can slow it down, you can speed it up. And then there's a second stage to it where they do something called like the mother breath, and you do much slower breathing. And that was very similar to like, allegedly to a dimethyltryptamine, like a DMT experience, might have been, so I hear. And where I had like a feeling of kind of floating and vivid hallucinations with my eyes closed, like, but not even that. It was more like a half awake, half asleep kind of state.
Yeah, like a lucid dreaming state.
Yeah, but I was able to sustain it for a longer period of time. And in that state, like, and leading up to it, I had all of these inspiring, interesting thoughts. And that was one side of it. But if I stilled my mind, it sort of brought me to that state. And
yeah, I know what you mean. Because like I had, when I was doing the Wim Hof breathing, like you're lying back on your back, and your body's sort of locked in place. And especially when you're holding your breath for 30, 60, or 90 seconds, like you're still, because you don't want to expend any energy and use up any additional oxygen. And that feeling of sort of being locked in place, and you experience, like I really experienced something akin to like time dilation, where like the 30 seconds, the 60 seconds, and the minute 90, I couldn't really tell the difference. Like I just lost count of like what an interval of time was like. And also that time dilation combined with sort of being locked in place and feeling weightless is, you know, that's similar to you know, what I have heard you know, DMT described as, you know. Well, it was similar to my DMT trip, let's say it that way.
Allegedly. Yeah.
You know, floating in space within the awareness of time.
Something like that. Yeah. But yeah, the beauty of it is you can summon it, right? And also like that it leaves you feeling like super healthy. Like,
unbelievable.
It's just an incredible feeling.
It's just amazing how much oxygen you can actually like sort of take in compared to like your normal breathing rate of just like going through the day, and what that actually does. And I don't know, man. Like I was very skeptical of like you know, activate your androgynous DMT and all that kind of like what I regarded as a little bit of woo-woo stuff. But like after actually having done the breathing, like it's pretty amazing, you know?
Yeah.
And
I mean, I can't say for sure that that's the mechanism, but like I think there's a good shot. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, it makes sense, right? Like DMT is produced, you know, in our brains. They think by the pineal gland, and is probably the mechanism responsible for a lot of the near-death experiences people have and those sort of vivid hallucinations. You know, it's in almost like every type of plant that you can think of. You know, and it stands to reason it could be accessed. Yeah, it could be accessed naturally.
Yeah. And but yeah, anyone who's interested in checking this out, like I really recommend checking out my friend. Go to Lungs of Love. Like if you Google that, I believe it's lungsoflove.com, but like if you Google Lungs of Love, it'll put you in contact with Jake, and there's some other breath experts there, I believe, as well. But yeah, super interesting to check out.
Yeah, and people should check out Wim Hof too. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Wim Hof and the Wim Hof method, really worth checking out.
So that's another thing. Like, I did like I was telling you before, I did my first cold plunge, just like couldn't get ice, but I did a cold bath, and then like we've been taking cold showers, like we've been doing the cold shower thing for years, but like yeah, doing a cold plunge is so different because it hits your body, like every single part of your body at the same time. And yeah, I was in there for like 10 minutes, and wow, that had a crazy effect on, you know, my entire system afterwards, like all positive too, I
Yeah.
just felt amazing. And yeah, like for people who don't know, like, cold therapy is a real thing. Like it boosts your immune system, it boosts the amount of white blood cells that are in your body that fight infection, it reduces inflammation. There's just like a whole bunch of benefits you get from exposing yourself to cold. And it's also good for
Yeah.
your metabolism, and it actually helps your body regulate blood sugar levels. And I'd recommend to anyone, try, just at first doing a contrast shower, like start hot and then do the last 30 seconds cold just to get a feel for it.
Yeah.
And then you sort of build up your tolerance to it. But
It acclimatizes you to shock as well. Like there's a
yeah,
lot of benefits in that, like where something suddenly changes, like because you feel the cold and you learn just mentally to relax, like to not be like, oh my God, that's so cold. Like when you do that, it's like that is a layer of mental think process that you're putting on top of this experience unnecessarily. If you just go into it with a little bit of stillness, like it doesn't freak you out. It doesn't, like, you don't have to react that way, right?
yeah,
Once
don't,
you
and just
learn that,
just be mindful, right? Like don't fight
yeah,
the cold, just roll with it. Like
if
the
you do
first
it,
time
just
I
walk
the
out.
first few
Like it,
times I did cold showers, like I was going in there and I was like, making all kind of crazy sounds and like I'm being
yeah,
tortured. And and then finally I had the resolve just going in there and being like, okay, do this silently. Like stop making noise, like stop yelling, and when you
yeah,
just stand there silently and think like, I'm not going to run away from the cold, I'm actually just going to embrace it. It's very different, and you realize like the shock is more in your head than it's actually a property of the cold.
yeah.
And yeah, you acclimatize to it really quickly. And yeah, man, I don't know, cold showers have been a part of my daily schedule for years now.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know, I recommend it to everyone, and it speeds up muscle recovery too, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
tons of things. And also, you just get out of the shower and you feel like a golden god. Like it feels fucking fantastic. Like, and that's another thing about the Wim Hof breathing too, or the double helix breathing, is that when you do that, it hyperoxygenates your system. And one of the things they're sort of toying around with right now with the coronavirus is that by hyperoxygenating the blood, it seems to be a promising treatment.
Yeah, I
Uh,
heard about that from New York.
that's
They're
being
playing with
used.
it.
So as a doctor, I recommend that everyone do this in order to cure the coronavirus. No, I'm not a doctor, and yeah, yeah. Yada yada yada. But like, who knows, right? But it does leave you feeling great, and I think that like from a mental health perspective, if you're cooped up at home, or you're dealing with the fear and anxiety, or having to cope with like being around people you care about till they drive you nuts, or whatever it is, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with a little bit of like meditation and just a boost of goodness, and happiness almost. It's like, yeah, it's like
Definitely, man.
free positive energy, you know?
Yeah, man. I
That's,
love it. So, do you want to leave it there? We'll wrap this one for now. We
yeah.
did AGI, Wim Hof breathing, and cold therapy.
You know what? In the artificial intelligence stuff, I have one more thing that I want
Yeah,
to
yeah,
bring
of
up.
course.
I have a question that I don't know whether this question is going to make it out there, but it's something else that's occurred to me from listening to this AI stuff, that I think is worth asking, even if it's just to find out how stupid a question is. So
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
I don't know, you're familiar with the concept of the Turing test, right? So
yeah, of
Alan
course.
Turing came up with an idea that one of the ways you could tell if something was sentient or intelligent, like a machine, would be if you could have a conversation with it for, I don't know, let's say 20 minutes or whatever, and you were unable to tell whether you were talking to a machine or a human. Like, so I guess you'd have a chat with a human and like a control chat, like, you know what I mean? And another, have a chat with a machine. And if people couldn't tell that this machine was a machine, if they thought they were talking to a human, basically, that is sort of proof that they've achieved artificial intelligence. So something that
It's
struck
kind
me
of a
about,
bad test, but
well, I mean,
yeah, I
you got to
get it.
start
Yeah,
somewhere. So it's an interesting idea, right? Like a very sophisticated chatbot might be what you get, like the results
yeah.
of, you know? But one thing that sort of struck me was that you could also do a reverse Turing test where you could sort of task a computer with knowing whether or not it was interacting with a human. So with all these like deep learning algorithm type scenarios, right, where you could have, say, well, let's say you were doing it with chatbots, right? So you could have chatbots that were interacting with humans and then interacting with other chatbots and asking them to determine in each case to make a guess about whether or not it's dealing with a human or another machine, and just have it known, like afterwards say, no, you were wrong, or yes, you were right, right? And some deep learning algorithm, in my mind, could conceivably give it the capacity to determine how a human behaves versus how a machine behaves, which um, might make its, I guess, interactions or its expressions more human over time, right? And like I was thinking, you could add this onto just about anything, like say AlphaGo. Like if at the end of each game it was asked, did you just play a machine or did you just play a human? And it came to understand the difference and then potentially learn to play like a human or something like that, or play more like a machine and understand the difference. Or even like say a self-driving car. Is that other car on the road like a human driver or a machine driver? And just so, yeah, I
Hmm.
see that like there's this hyper layer that you could kind of add to like already existing AIs. And I wonder if that would help to create a kind of a self-awareness, or yeah, just an ability to emulate or a human, or help humans to understand what a human is, because that's part of the problem, right? Is like we're trying to create like a machine that can either emulate a human or have human consciousness, and we don't quite know what a human is. So it's, yeah.
All right.
So
I
I
don't
guess I
know,
was
man.
wondering, is there any
Reverse
work
Turing
done in
test.
this field? So Lex, if you're out there listening to my bullshit podcast here, I'd love it if you could weigh in on this on your podcast, because I love your podcast.
Yeah, we should look it up, the reverse Turing test, because like it makes sense. It makes sense to me. It's a worthwhile concept versus exploring.
Yeah.
I think an AGI would have some sort of selection criteria for figuring out pretty quick what they were interfacing with, and it might come down to just like the reverse Turing test is that um, I'm interfacing with a human when I'm dealing with a level of irrationality, emotion, contradiction, and nonsensical behavior.
Yeah.
That might be the reverse Turing test.
There you go. So that's a freebie AI world. Like hopefully I can help you have that baby that you're not ready for. You're
All
not
right,
ready to
man.
have kids.
All right, let's leave it there. Let's and thank you everyone for tuning in to episode 5 of
Yes.
the Corona podcast, where we take a break from Corona to discuss Wim Hof breathing, um, AGI, and the reverse Turing test.
Yeah. Oh, one last quick thing. So there's this thing that I've discovered called foldingathome.com. And it is a site that you can go to where you can lend computer space to the studying of folding, of basically running simulations of folding proteins. And this can help to fight various diseases. And in particular, right now, a lot of this is geared towards fighting the coronavirus. By studying and understanding it, the proteins within the virus. So I encourage people to check that out, because I've been using some of my computer to my CPU and my GPU, basically to contribute to this cloud computing effort. And I really think that I'll be mad if they're mining Bitcoin or something, but it's really left me with this feeling like I'm kind of punching back And it's a good
Yeah,
feeling.
it's something that people can do, that people
Yeah,
can contribute, not passively, just with social distancing, but it's something, actively, fighting back
yeah.
and trying to solve the problem.
So foldingathome.com. Like, please check it out. And yeah, if you want, participate.
All
Anyways,
right, man.
all right. Love you all.
Take care.